Chapter 46, A Broken Rule. Nancy came over to give Amy a hug as soon as she walked into the store the next morning. "I'm so sorry about your beautiful bird," she apologized with great compassion. "I should have tried harder to find Ripple. She has a collar on now, but I'm sorry it's too late." Amy hugged Nancy back. "It's not your fault," she assured her friend, feeling much better about everything. "I saw Ripple yesterday afternoon, and I should have tried harder to catch her." The girls busied themselves with their food preparations. Nancy checked on the baking bread while Amy cracked eggs into a bowl. Santa was the first to arrive with a large clump of bananas. "Great singing last night," she clapped. "What?" Amy's face paled noticeably as she stirred the eggs in the hot pan. You heard me?" "I think everyone heard you and Zahir singing," Santa laughed in a teasing, scolding sort of way. Amy's hands flew up to her face. "I thought that was a private song." "It's hard to have a private song in paradise," Santa laughed again, waggling her finger and wiggling her hips. She laughed some more, but it wasn't happy laughing. It had an accusatory tone. "We were all watching out your window," she informed Amy in a sing-song voice. Shaking her finger, she added, "And you broke the rule." Amy closed her eyes and breathed deeply. "Oh no," she said again, realizing that Santa and likely Georgia had seen the hugs. "I really liked your song," Nancy remarked, pulling the hot bread out of the oven. "At least the one you sang with Zahir. The first one was too sad." Amy frowned anxiously. "Even you heard Nancy?" "Sure did," Nancy smiled, "just faintly. But you were singing on the top of a hill." "Me too," Milan remarked, adding the bananas to the big fruit salad. Living as he did on Rainbow Hill with Zahir, it was no surprise that he had heard. A slight smile on his face signaled his approval. "I only intended to sing alone," Amy said defensively, taking the scrambled eggs off the hot burner and bringing them over to the counter. "But Zahir was upset about Fredo, and he needed to sing as well." Santa picked up a honey bun. "Ooh, these are my favorite banana honey buns," she exclaimed, doing her wiggle dance. She helped herself to fruit salad and eggs, and then said, "Well, I'm eating breakfast outside." Amy followed her out. "Is anyone else upset with me?" "Well, Georgia isn't super pleased," Santa relayed. "She said that she told everyone that she loves Zahir first, so he is her man and you are interfering." With a big sigh, Amy tried to justify her actions. "He is her man. But we, like Zahir and I, well, we just have always sung things together, and we both just lost our pets." "Rules are rules," Santa said. "We all agreed. You didn't need to hug him. And why did you sleep on the hill?" "I just wanted to enjoy the view a little longer, and then I fell asleep," Amy replied. "Did I wake you all up when I came in to change this morning?" "I was already awake," Santa assured her. Before Amy could respond, Georgia arrived. "Hey, Amy, want to try the xylophone? It's finished now." I would love to sometime," Amy nodded, feeling rather flustered. She had no doubt that Georgia planned to confront her about the broken rule, and she wasn't quite ready to face her angry housemate. "I'd better help Nancy with breakfast." Amy dashed back inside, but Georgia followed her. Georgia's beautiful green eyes were angry and proud. She didn't have to trade anything for her foods, and she was working so hard on her books. Picking up breakfast, Georgia went back outside without saying another word. There was no doubt, however, that the blonde-haired beauty was very upset. As Amy helped Nancy serve out the honey buns and bread, she heard Zahir talking outside. He sounded exasperated. "What do you mean I broke a rule?" he argued. "What rule? I didn't hurt anyone or steal." Santa's voice was louder than Georgia's. "You hurt Georgia," she protested. There was a long pause. "Okay," Zahir admitted slowly. "It was certainly not my intention, but I suppose I did." After a long pause, Amy heard Zahir say in his usual compassionate tone, "I'm sorry to have hurt you, Georgia. I'm really sorry." From inside the kitchen, everyone strained to hear the next part of the conversation, but the voices were too quiet. Then Zahir spoke again in a louder tone. "Didn't any of you girls hear Amy's sad song?" he questioned. "Didn't you hear her crying? Why was she out there all alone when she has a house full of friends?" Amy couldn't hear George's response, but she did hear Zahir's answer. "Well, she needed a friend," he argued, "and Amy was one of my friends. If she's crying and needs a hug, I don't understand why it's wrong to give her one. No one else needs to feel hurt about it." Inside the kitchen, they all heard Georgia start crying. "Well, you see," Santa said, "the girls made a rule, and you and Amy broke it." "You made a rule? Like your own rule?" Zahir sounded astonished. "Yes," Santa laughed, and then she launched into a description of the rule the girls had agreed to follow. Behind the building board walls, Nancy looked over at Amy with raised eyebrows. "I guess our rule isn't a secret anymore," she said. "There's something wrong with that rule," they heard Zahir say, but Amy couldn't hear his explanation. She looked up quizzically at Nancy, and her friend shrugged. All they could hear were the louder parts of the conversation. Clearing his throat, Milan spoke up. "That rule isn't fair," he said. "It doesn't give the guys any say." Amy and Nancy looked at him in surprise. Helplessly, he raised his hands on each side. "Well, shouldn't the decision about who loves who be made by both the guy and the girl? Not just all the girls?" Nancy waffled uneasily. "Well, the guy can decide if he'd rather hang out with someone else." "I still say it favors the girls," Milan argued. Looking at Milan and then Nancy, Amy nodded her head vigorously. "It does," she agreed, "and I never liked that rule. I wish I hadn't agreed to it." When Zahir came walking in with his morning catch, Amy smiled and did her best to act as though everything was normal, even though inside her heart was beating twice as fast and her hands felt hot and sweaty. However, Zahir didn't look in Amy's direction. Quietly, he passed Milan his pot of fresh fish fillets and collected a honey bun. His dark face was flushed, and they could all tell he was quite upset. Once again, Amy sensed the distant, unfriendly demeanor that she struggled to understand. In her mind, she pondered anxiously. One minute, he is my friend. The next minute, he isn't. Why does he do this? Odin had overheard the discussion outside the store, and as he walked in and Zahir walked out, he couldn't resist mocking. "Hey, I hear you're breaking rules. I am always happy to welcome you over to my side of paradise if you don't belong on the other side anymore." He snickered. "You can join us, the rule breakers." With a withering glance in Odin's direction, Zahir didn't answer. He walked outside. "Where's Uncle Louis?" Amy heard Zahir ask as she began to fry the fish. She put 2 fillets in the oven to bake, as Uncle Louis had told her he could no longer eat anything that was fried. No one knew where Uncle Louis was. The door to his bedroom was shut, but it was unlikely that he would still be asleep. As Amy finished her kitchen duties, she heard his name being called outside. Chapter 47. A New Motto. Uncle Louis stumbled out of the small room in the store that had become his home. "Oh, I guess I slept in this morning," he mumbled, trying to smooth down his ruffled white hair. "You must have been very tired," Nancy replied. "It's been noisy this morning, what with broken rules and lots of accusations." "Broken rules? Accusations?" Uncle Louis questioned. "What rules were broken?" Nancy told him the whole story while Amy set out the baked fish and then helped Milan finish the dishes. Uncle Louis listened thoughtfully as he thought about the professor's message that Amy and Zahir had reconciled. He had been in the cave reading and researching the intriguing new topic that now consumed him. Last night, he had discovered that God had a special son. The powerful message delivered by God's son were ringing true in so many ways. It was servant leadership at a much higher level. In the last week, Louis had rarely slept more than 3 hours a night, yet he felt driven by an energy he had never had before. When Nancy finished the story, Uncle Louis's first response was, "I'm not impressed that you girls made a secret rule." Helping himself to some fruit, the older Tiny reluctantly resisted a banana honey bun and chose the baked fish over the last piece that was fried. He clarified the matter with Amy. "So Zahir gave you a hug because you were crying, And then you sang a song together about friendship. Turning red, Amy nodded. That's all, she insisted. But you girls made a rule that the first one to say that they love a guy gets to claim him, Uncle Louis reiterated, with an amused shake of his head. And then no one else can hug him or tell him that they love him, or spend time alone with him, or make him their special friend, Nancy listed off. Before eating his food, Uncle Louis paused and closed his eyes. Resting his forehead against his hands, he looked very tired. Amy wondered if he was weary with sorting through all their dilemmas. Opening his eyes back up again, the aging Tiny took a fork full of fish. He pondered the situation. First of all, he said, I'm not against rules. If I could, I'd add a few more good rules to our board outside. However, rules can only be made by those with the authority to make the rules, or if the majority of us were to agree that it is a good rule. They can't be made by just one half of our population in secret. Rules can be destructive if they favor one group over another. So the girls' rule will not be kept here in paradise. With a wide grin spreading across her face, Amy nodded. She was very pleased that Uncle Louis had dismissed the dumb rules so easily. Looking up at her as he dug into his fruit salad, Uncle Louis said, I'm really thankful, Amy, that you had a good friend who shared your pain when you were crying. If I had heard you, I would have given you a hug. Thank you, Uncle Louis, Amy smiled. I know you would have. He nodded, but there was a sober look in his eyes. With a sigh, he probed. Tell me, Amy, if Zahir was your boyfriend, and you saw him hugging another girl in the night and singing a beautiful song with her, how would that make you feel? Very jealous, I guess, Amy admitted. Looking a little surprised that she had answered so quickly, Uncle Louis nodded. Yes, you probably would, he agreed. So regardless of rules or lack of rules, always think of this principle. Whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. If you always treat others the way you want to be treated, you will rarely go wrong. Amy looked up wide-eyed. She had never heard Uncle Louis say this before. This message was different than the no hurting rule. It went way deeper. She had to think about it carefully. Thinking about it evoked a small measure of empathy towards Georgia, but it quickly faded. So, should I have just told Zahir to go away? She asked, a little miffed to think that she shouldn't have accepted Zahir's welcome comfort. Well, you need to think of Zahir's feelings as well as Georgia's, Uncle Louis said gently, finishing off his breakfast. They are both your friends. But imagine yourself in George's place. It wasn't hard for Amy to envision herself as Zahir's girlfriend, standing at the window jealously watching the dark-haired man whom she loved hug another girl. She knew the hugs hadn't been just quickly friendly embraces, but the best hugs she'd ever been given. The song hadn't been a silly little ditty, but a deep personal expression of friendship. Had things been the other way around, she realized that she would have hoped the other girl would respect that Zahir already had a special relationship and not add in a touching line about her heart mending. Tears welled up in her eyes. Should I apologize to Georgia? Amy asked grudgingly. That would be really nice if you did, Uncle Louis agreed, reaching over to squeeze her hand. It might help to ease some of the hurt feelings. Resentful that her beautiful moment with Zahir had been ruined by all the protests, and upset that she now had to apologize, Amy left the store alone. Once again, tears were in her eyes and angry feelings were in her heart. Georgia was waiting outside the store to walk with Amy on the way to school. Amy was miserable. Georgia hadn't included her in anything for a long while, and she knew this wasn't a friendly catch-up. On the way to the schoolhouse, the beautiful blonde chatted about Zahir's amazing work on the xylophone, and how he could tell if a note was only off by a little, and how he knew exactly how to make it right. Amy kept quiet, while angry feelings smoldered. She didn't want to hear how amazing Zahir was from someone who was guarding him jealously. Uncle Louis's wise words echoed in her head, but they were having no effect on her heart. She chafed at the thought of apologizing when she didn't feel one bit sorry for what she had done. Ahead of her, Santa was racing after Lima because he had taken her multicolored sequin scarf. I'll get you back, Lima boy, Santa was shouting. Nah, you'll never catch me, Lima laughed. Oh, yes, I will, Santa laughed. And when I do, you'll get tossed headfirst into the chicken yard. Lima turned around and egged her on. Try it, he teased. Charlie walked sadly behind them, holding Bojo in his arms. He was devastated that Santa was no longer his special friend. I love Zahir, Georgia said firmly, with a happy sigh, as they drew closer to the schoolhouse. They could see the other tinies finding seats on the stairs. I'm so glad you only like him as a friend. Amy didn't look up. She clenched her jaw and stopped walking. She didn't want to get any closer to the schoolhouse and be overheard. You and Kenzie would be really good for each other, Georgia continued with a smile as they stood a safe distance from the school. He's always busy like you. He works hard. He's good-looking. And I know he loves your voice. He told me so. You aren't the only one who loves Zahir, Amy said quietly. Georgia stopped smiling. Maybe not, she retorted fiercely, her green eyes narrowing. But I told everyone I love Zahir first, and you agreed to our rule. No hugging is part of the rule. Anger provoked more anger. Uncle Louis said that rule is dumb, the copper-haired girl protested loudly. He said it isn't a rule anymore. We don't have to keep it. With tears streaming down, she added, You don't deserve Zahir. You think you're better than him. He was my friend first. I hate you. Seeing the stunned look on George's face and horrified by her own outburst, Amy turned around to run for cover. That was when she realized that Uncle Louis was right behind her. He had heard everything. The look of deep disappointment in his eyes broke her heart. Instead of apologizing to Georgia, she had actually made things worse. She'd even misrepresented Uncle Louis's response to the rule. Unable to bear any more, Amy fled to the garden. Chapter 48, Drama and Deliberations. Through all the emotional drama that morning, 20 very important scientists from around the world were listening intently. As the tinies walked to the schoolhouse to hear Uncle Louis's lesson on solar energy, many scientists were asking the professor questions about their lives, activities, and state of mind. Since Evan had told the tinies that they were being watched occasionally, sometimes it had occurred to them that this could be the case. However, they never saw anyone looking back and rarely noticed instant responses, so with all the deliberations that morning, no one considered that there might be many eyes gazing in. Some of the 20 intelligent visitors had found the morning conflicts over the girls' rule fascinating, while others were amused. Only the remarks made outside the store had been heard. Uncle Louis's quiet comments to Amy over breakfast had not been picked up. That no hurting rule is very simple, yet complicated, one scientist reflected, observing Amy's sad face as she walked with Georgia on the path to school. She wasn't the only tiny that morning with a glum face. There were at least 5. You seem to have a number of tinies in romantic distress, one scientist remarked. Does the no-hurting rule apply to feelings, like romantic feelings? That's a fair question, the professor contemplated. I suppose to some degree it should. The tall Australian scientist reflected. From what I heard this morning, the good-looking fellow with the dark, wavy hair, likely Zahir, the professor told him. Ah, yes. Well, I would say that Zahir hurt the blonde beauty. Should I say his girlfriend? Professor Lemans nodded. Georgia, he told him. I suppose she is his girlfriend, he admitted reluctantly. And Zahir gave some other girl an inappropriate hug? No, the professor said defensively, quite dismayed that the beautiful reconciliation the night before had caused so much turmoil. He now appreciated Evan's foresight in suggesting they wait until everyone was 25. Zahir and Amy were always good friends from the very start, he explained. I didn't even know about the silly girls rule until today. It was never approved by me, and it's likely been the cause of many misunderstandings. All of a sudden, Amy's outburst caught them all by surprise. Professor Lemhans was embarrassed, especially when the lovely copper-haired girl ended her angry tirade with, I hate you. Swallowing hard, Jack swung around in time to see his beloved girl running toward the farmland to hide behind the tomato plants. He saw Uncle Louis standing silently, watching the runaway flee. He knew Louis shared his disappointment, and Louis had no idea how terrible the timing was. "Did you hear what she said?" Georgia protested tearfully to the older Tiny. "I've never heard anyone say they hate someone. First she tries to steal my man, and then she yells at me for being upset. Aren't you going to tell her off?" "In time," Uncle Louis nodded, if I need to." The dilemma instigated a debate in the viewing room. Jax found himself trying to justify the situation as he showed the video of the first celebration and explained about the recent loss of pets and Amy's sad song on the hill. "But if Georgia is his girlfriend," the female German scientist contended, "hugging another girl would hurt her feelings. Therefore, I would agree that Zahir broke your rule." Several scientists agreed with her. Reluctantly, the professor had to admit she had a good point. Once again, something he thought was right and beautiful was in question by others who thought it was wrong and hurtful. In his mind, Amy and Zahir belonged together, and Georgia was the intruder. But there was no doubt that personal bias had clouded his vision. There was a lengthy discussion over whether or not the no-hurting rule applied to romantic feelings and if the girls' rule was valid. The renowned physicist from California deliberated. So what would one do if they didn't want to be in a romantic relationship with someone else who claimed them? Do they have to stay with that person just because they aren't allowed to hurt their feelings? "Oh, I don't think there's anything more painful than a broken heart," the German lamented. "I've always heard all is fair in love and war," a Dutch scientist argued. "I don't think you can apply your rule to relationships, at least not unless marriage-style promises have been made," she insisted. "Pain is simply part of the investigative process as people attempt to find a mutual friendship that works well for both of them." The intense discussion was good, even if the professor had hoped to share a happier day with his guests. Yet he knew this was all part of studying human behavior in ideal circumstances. Adding in his own opinion, Jacques Leman said, "I think one simple rule of no hurting is valid and good. However, I admit it's hard to apply in all situations." "True," the Australian agreed. "And if you try to make a rule for every possible situation, you'll quickly run out of room on your board. And who has the authority to make a rule? Better to keep it simple. Give the teens the opportunity to sort things out for themselves." "They need to follow their hearts," the professor nodded. Not everyone agreed, and the argument continued until another loud noise inside the dome caught their attention. Had the Tinies known they were under close observation that morning, Odin might not have yelled so loudly at Damien, who was trying to explain to his group why they needed to keep the foil very smooth. But then again, had Odin known he had an audience, he might have yelled even louder. Damien certainly would not have yelled back. Had Damien known so many eyes were looking his way, he may have lost focus on the solar oven he was building and started planning a grand surfing show. He would have wanted to entertain all the scientists with his impressive abilities on the water. Georgia would not likely have talked so openly to Lily about Amy's wrongdoing. Poncy might not have snuck into the store to steal elastic bands for the target practice area. Dia may have put a little more effort into helping her partners build the cooker if she had known the scientists were asking if she was lazy. In her defense, the professor explained that she was an amazing dressmaker and worked steadily every day making the attractive clothing that most were wearing. Amy would not have stayed behind the tomato plants for so long had she known so many were looking in. She might have tried to be more sincere and kind when she finally approached Georgia and flatly apologized for her words, if not her actions. She was well aware that her apology sounded similar to those Odin had given in the past, and she felt conscience-stricken that she wasn't treating Georgia the way she would want to be treated. Had she known that the professor was watching and hoping she would impress his 20 important guests, she might have offered to make amends. Perhaps then she would have felt better about herself and returned to her quiet group and tried to cheer them up. For you see, Kenzie was also unusually glum that morning as they finished the parabolic cooker. The songs of the night had reached his ears as well, and this was his second heartbreak. Charlie definitely would not have snuck in behind the store for a private cry once Santa had told him she needed all afternoon to practice with Lima. At the very least, Charlie might have chosen a different place to shed his tears if he knew that a microphone was a powerful amplifier and that he was standing only 8 centimeters below it. Nancy, who saw Charlie's tears, may not have confronted Santa when she met her coming back from the outhouse. Nancy thought she had chosen a very private location to address her friend's inconsistent behavior, but the schoolhouse microphone picked up their conversation quite well. "You told everyone that Charlie was yours," Nancy protested, "and now you're hurting Charlie and running after Lima." All the scientists listened carefully. "I never said I couldn't change my mind," Santa replied defiantly. "But you told Zahir off for giving Amy a hug and hurting George's feelings. How can you turn around and hurt Charlie?" Santa shrugged thoughtfully. Finally, with a gracious tone, she said, "I'm giving Charlie his complete freedom. He's not mine anymore. Now I'm claiming Lima." "Did Lima agree to this?" Nancy questioned firmly. "We didn't say the guys had to agree to anything," Santa argued. "Only that they had to enjoy being with us." Several male scientists laughed out loud. In the viewing hall, there was no need to keep voices low, as the windows were double pane and very soundproof. Nancy went on to inform Santa that Uncle Louis had dismissed the girls' rule. When she explained about the new principle Uncle Louis had put in place instead, Santa was astounded. Some of the scientists were also astounded. "Oh, that's from the Bible," the German remarked curiously. "Non, the professor retorted quickly. "The tinies don't know anything about the Bible. Louis took servant leadership courses online. The Golden Rule is an integral part of that program." Not even Uncle Louis knew they were all on display that morning. Had he known, he may have postponed his announcement that it was time to put together another thank you celebration for the professor. While there was a positive response from some, there were others who saw this as an encroachment on their time and didn't see what there was to celebrate. "We just had a celebration," Odin complained. "I don't see why we need to have another one so soon. I don't feel like celebrating slavery." "We are very thankful for this beautiful world we live in," Uncle Louis replied. "We have new houses. All the cleanup was done for us. Everything grows well. We have plenty of food, books, and projects." "Zahir and I will do a song," Georgia offered. Zahir looked at her wide-eyed as she raised his hand in the air. "We'll do it with the amazing new xylophone," she cheered. "That would be wonderful," Uncle Louis praised. And then he noticed the crestfallen look on Amy's face. Santa waved her arms wildly in the air and offered to do a shake-it-up show with Lima. "Ours will be a happy song," she laughed. "It won't have any words, just music, movement, and joy." Lima was nodding in full agreement. Uncle Louis smiled gratefully. Charlie turned away and hid his youthful face in his hands. Still small and wiry, Charlie was only just beginning to grow a beard. Yu Yan came over to sit beside him. "I'm not singing anything," Odin grumbled. "Until this rock job is over, I hate my life." Ponzi agreed. "It's a little hard for us to be happy right now," he muttered. There were a number of other grumbles, which greatly amused the scientist and embarrassed the professor. However, being completely unaware that there were so many important scientists observing their behavior, the tinies demonstrated that they were regular human beings, living in a fantastically well-designed, beautifully crafted paradise, which had become rather ordinary to them in less than 8 months. It was clear to see that they were attempting to cope with similar emotional responses and upsets that many others shared in the real world. As much as the professor had hoped to create a world with minimal suffering, there was an obvious flaw which he had blindly overlooked. Jacques Lemans was only now beginning to realize that he might learn more from his enormous tiny experiment than anyone else. His hypothesis had been proven wrong, and he wasn't quite sure what to make of it all. Chapter 49, A Rough Day. So tell me, Professor Lemans, the renowned physicist from California requested later that day, what will happen to all these tinies if something were to remove you and Evan from this project? Remove both of us? The professor asked slowly, with one eyebrow cocked. Well, sickness or death or a bad accident. Do you have a backup plan? Up to this point, no, the professor admitted. However, now that our project is open to the public eye, we will be training others to operate the systems. Much of it is automatically regulated, of course. A worthy consideration, the British scientists agreed. These are human lives, after all, and therefore they need protection. Oh, I just saw fire, the Dutch scientist called out. Is that supposed to happen? Where? Professor Lemans asked with alarm. Over there, with that Viking boy and the sturdy girl with the straight brown hair. Professor Lemans looked over at Odin and Nancy. He noticed that the third member of their team, Damien, was visiting beneath his group. Let's do that again, Odin was saying. Oh, that was so cool. That was dangerous, Odin, Nancy protested. We could have been burned. Burns hurt. You have to be very careful with hot things. Ah, you're too worried about everything, Odin sneered. He picked up another scrap of cardboard. Nancy was firm. She stood up and put her hands on her hips. If you even pretend to do that again, I'm calling Uncle Louie. Odin was intent on his mission. Their parabolic cooker focused the sun's rays on a center point where they had fixed a flat, black piece of metal for baking the bread. Uncle Louie! Nancy yelled. Come quickly! In a moment, Uncle Louie was by her side. Nancy explained about the hot, bright light that had flared up and instantly consumed the last piece of cardboard. As the scientist listened in amusement, the professor felt a great deal of trepidation. Allures, Odin knows about fire. How foolish of me to give him this project. Fire would be a very dangerous weapon in Odin's arsenal. Oh la la! With the high oxygen levels, a fire would quickly get out of hand. I must message Louis the first chance I get. He heard Milan jingle the bell at the store, calling all the tinies to lunch. That is their lunch bell, the professor explained calmly to the scientists, thankful the solar experimenting was over for the day. Everyone watched as the young adults put their project safely away on the schoolhouse deck and eagerly hurried over for lunch. Odin and Ponzi pushed past the others to reach the door first. However, Uncle Louis was standing outside the store and stopped the two troublemakers. Have you forgotten something? He asked. Feigning ignorance, the young men looked at each other in surprise. What are the consequences for stealing honey buns? Many of the scientists chuckled. Stealing honey buns, the Australian psychologist repeated. He laughed loudly. Oh my, how restrictive is this place? The professor felt the consequences were quite justified. We all saw Ponzi stealing elastics from the store, he reminded him. We want the tinies to learn to trade for things in order to keep them honest and productive. These two fellows broke into the store just before dawn last week, assaulted the storekeeper, and stole 30 honey buns. The British scientist nodded and then held up his hand in a hushing gesture. I want to hear what consequence is given out, he said. Uncle Louie's voice was coming through the microphone. Last night, you didn't take out the compost, he told them firmly. And you didn't do it this morning either. So go get the job done. We were so tired last night, Odin whined, rubbing his eyes wearily. It's unbearable to work all afternoon. Ponzi rubbed his thighs. Oh, my legs hardly bend anymore. Uncle Louis smiled. Good news, he told them. Sore muscles means you're getting stronger. You boys will be in tip-top shape when your job is done. Huh, I thought this was paradise, the American psychologist chuckled. Sounds more like boot camp to me. He's tough, the Australian smiled. Come to think of it, a work project is a better consequence for young offenders than lazing around in a jail. Professor Lemans felt inclined to explain. These two have caused serious trouble in paradise. Serious trouble? The Australian chuckled. Were they chasing the sheep? No, this was serious trouble, the professor stated. He then explained the whole story of the flood, the rebuilding, and his decision to grant complete forgiveness. Only, our gracious decision didn't really impact them at all, he reported. We overheard their conversation afterwards, and they were already scheming about new ways to cause havoc. A flood is serious, the American agreed. A fire may be devastating. What safety measures do you have in place? The professor explained his system quickly, and then with a slight tremble down his spine, he suggested, "Why don't we all have a bite to eat? Please follow me to the Reptile Cafe." Opening the door into the mirrored hallway, the professor held it while his guests filed through. He motioned for them to take the stone pathway to the little cafe nearby. Round tables lined the elliptical viewing area, overlooking a pond through tall glass panels. Cascading into the pond, a large, thundering waterfall streamed down over a rocky descent and kept all the water circulating. Iguanas, caiman crocodiles, and turtles lazed in and around the pond, sleeping in the shade of the tall ramon, ipe, and rubber trees. A lengthy boa constrictor was sunning himself on the rocks in a separate enclosure. It was truly a beautiful scene. Everyone was delighted to find that the caterers had prepared a lovely buffet lunch in the leaf-frame serving area. As the scientists lined up for their meal, the professor excused himself to use the washroom. The washrooms were at the other end of the rainforest biome, but the professor took the quick route through the mirrored hall to reach the men's room. Once safely inside, he pulled out his phone and messaged Louis. "I saw the fire. We can't allow Odin to have the ability to start a fire. This solar experiment must be shut down and all the ovens delivered to me on the train tomorrow morning. Maybe you can find a way to turn this into a competition. Tell them I'll judge the projects or something like that. Insist that Nancy doesn't allow Odin to purchase any foil at the store. I'm busy the next few days with important guests who are viewing Paradise. You are all being watched. Please keep a close eye on Odin. I'll leave this in your capable hands." When he returned to the Reptile Cafe, Jax found himself last in line behind a tall, blonde female scientist from Norway. Many of the others were now sitting at the tables, commenting on the magnificent waterfall and pointing out the various reptiles they could see. "You have some very good-looking tinies," the Norwegian laughed as she helped herself to the coconut chicken salad and slices of pineapple. "Yes, that dark-haired boy is a prince," a female Danish scientist giggled, joining the line behind the professor. She was returning for second helpings. "You must be referring to Zahir," the professor told them proudly as he helped himself to the food. "He and Amy have created some beautiful songs." "Oh, I'd love to hear one," the Danish scientist begged, picking up a grilled chicken and chipotle sandwich. As they made their way over to the tables in front of the glass enclosure, the professor said, "I did record a new one just the other day." He set his food down on the table and took his phone out of his lab coat. Scrolling through his apps, he found his recording and pressed play. "Sometimes when I'm sad," began the gentle melody. Everyone around him looked up. "When I'm feeling bad, when I can't find glad, I need to reach out, I need to stop doubt, I need to turn around and find a special friend." There were tears in the Norwegian's eyes. "That is so beautiful," she raved. "What lovely voices! You should record them professionally and release the song." "It's a rather sad song, if you ask me," the Australian pointed out, taking a bite out of his vegan black bean wrap. "I'd say they are suffering." "Yes," the professor agreed. "But I suppose teen years have their ups and downs wherever you are. Emotions ebb and flow." Amy's final line was solo. "Because that's how my heart will mend." "What is the reason for the broken hearts?" a French psychologist attempted to clarify. "They both lost pets." "Lost, as in they can't find them?" the British scientist chuckled, sampling a forkful of asparagus quiche. "Well, no," the professor explained. "One died of old age, and the other was eaten by a cat." The British scientist sat back in his chair and wagged his finger in a knowing fashion. "Ah, the age-old problem of mortality," he mused. "Hard one to beat," the Californian scientist agreed. She was nearly finished her sandwich. Suddenly she noticed two iguanas were fighting on the rocks below. "Oh, look at that," she called out. "They are really going at it." All the other scientists craned their necks to see the action. "Yes, it's mating season," the professor replied. "Do they ever fight to the death?" the Danish scientist asked in alarm. Watching the iguanas squirm around and bite each other, the professor nodded. "They could," he replied. "We have attendants keeping a watchful eye on all the exhibits. These two have been getting along." Rachel Khalid suddenly walked out of the animal care center. Wearing leather overalls and tall boots, she was also donning her big, heavy gloves. She took a moment to smile and wave at everyone. Professor Lemans introduced her quickly. Rachel is the head doctor of the biosphere, he told them all. She does a remarkable job keeping everything safe, healthy, and well-fed. All the scientists clapped. Blushing, Rachel gave a thankful bow. Then pulling her gloves up high, she explained, I'm just going to grab Bert. He's always getting beat up. Everyone watched with great interest as Rachel climbed down into the pond area and pulled the two iguanas apart. Taking the one up in her arms and fending off the other that was biting her boots, she gracefully made her way back to the animal care center. There was another round of applause. Having finished his wrap and going back for a cocoa bliss ball, the Australian asked, What is the name of the blonde tiny again? Her name is Georgia, the professor smiled. She is also quite musically inclined and a good artist. There were many other inquiries, some favorable, some derogatory, and the professor did his best to present his tinies in a positive light. Well, I vote to go back in and watch some more, the vocal psychologist called out, raising his right arm in the air. Having feasted well on all the good food, everyone agreed and piled their empty plates in the wash bins. The professor led the way back to the viewing room. Lunch was long over in Paradise, and a surfing show was about to take place. Many of the tinies were lined up on the pier. Ooh la la, you've got to see this, the professor raved, motioning for everyone to join him quickly. Georgia and Kenzie were providing an upbeat shake and clang to tell everyone it was time to gather. Moving their bodies to the beat, Santa and Lima were wearing complimentary, colorful surfing suits with plenty of sequins. They performed their synchronized show in a jolly fashion with lots of laughter, funny sounds, and lively dancing. White-capped crests were rolling in across the lake. A female tiny with long dark hair stood at the end of the pier in a glittering blue outfit, clutching her surfboard. One lanky young man with stringy brown hair stood beside her and was wrapping his ripcord around his ankle. Many of the tinies were sitting on the edge of the pier with their legs in the water, watching the well-built surfer who was already far out as he paddled to the edge of the lake. Damien was attempting to reach the full impact zone. Hey, this looks fun, the Australian cheered as Franz and Lima dove in with their boards. Those waves are cranking. Santa and Vanitha stayed on the pier waiting for their moment to join the show. Oh, and look, there's the Viking, one of the female scientists called out, gazing in a different direction to everyone else. Sure enough, on Mining Hill, the two discontents were digging out long flat rocks under Uncle Louie's supervision, and the blonde one did look Scandinavian. The scrawny one called Uncle Louie over to examine something. When the older tiny's back was turned, Odin picked up a sign and waved it in the air. Big letters spelled out, Get us out of here. Perplexed, the professor wondered what Odin was thinking. Uncle Louie put a stop to his actions as soon as he noticed, but by then all the scientists were commenting on the visual request. He really is unhappy in there, the psychologist mused. He's in boot camp, the Australian reminded him. No one enjoys facing their consequences. Here come the cooks, the professor pointed out, hoping to divert attention to the show. Amy, Nancy, and Milam were running from the store in the direction of the lake. A petite female scientist was intrigued. How did they learn to cook? She asked. Trial and error, the professor replied. I did send in a little cookbook, which they use a lot. Occasionally Louis, the older man you see in there, will Google recipes online and send me the link. Then I'll print off the recipe in a 6-point font and send them in on the train. Turning around sharply, the British scientist asked, Did you say Google? As the surfing show began, many of the scientists were intent on watching the performance, while the professor talked to the others about the control cave, the phone, and Louis, his first little man. Ooh, he's good, the German scientist applauded, watching the show. Did you see that flip? What a star, some of the others agreed. I'll bet all the girls are after him, the German scientist added. Franz and Lima were still swimming out to the waves. Two girls stood on the pier with surfboards in hand. I'd say all three dudes must get a lot of attention, the Californian laughed. Nice show. While one of the beach boys had taken surfing to a new level, Lima had spent more time teaching Santa than perfecting his own moves, and Franz had been hanging out at Odin's target practice much more than at the lake. Lima didn't quite execute his cutback, and Franz fell off his board twice. Damien had also been teaching anyone who showed up for a lesson, especially Vanitha, but he still managed to perform well. Look, "Now the girls are heading out," the British scientist exclaimed. Everyone strained to see. Sure enough, 2 girls were paddling out to the waves. "That's Vanitha and Santa," Professor Leman said proudly. "Vanitha is the most artistic. Everyone trades for her beautiful pottery. Lately she's been learning how to surf. And Santa has been a dedicated gardener until recently. She's always laughing and singing, and she has rhythm. She's been teaching a few others her dance moves." "Both beauties," the Australian declared. Vanitha and Santa stuck to the basics, but they stayed on their boards and had some long rides. All the scientists cheered and clapped when they rode into shore. The professor was thankful he had put in double-pane glass so that the loud noises didn't transfer to paradise. For the next few hours, when the show was over, the scientists watched the farmers maintain the gardens. They saw Vanitha paint pottery, and they heard Zahir and Georgia attempt to create a new thank you song. They watched Amy carting vegetables and another pot of honey to the store, while Odin and Ponzi began work on the patio under Louis' supervision. However, they couldn't see inside the store where Nancy, Milan, and Amy prepared dinner, nor did the voices always come through clearly when the visitors hoped they would. Overall, in the 8 hours of viewing that day, the scientists saw enough to get an idea of what life was like in the professor's paradise. Between regular refreshment breaks in the reptile cafe and lengthy questions and answers, it wasn't until just before dinner that another salient discussion was overheard. Odin and Ponzi were on their way to Mining Hill to collect another cart full of rocks. "Man, I hate this place," Odin was saying. "We're slaves in here." "We need to find a way out of this cage," Ponzi agreed. "I think I know a way," Odin bragged. "How?" Leaning over, Odin whispered in Ponzi's ear. "It would be helpful to know what he is saying," the professor laughed, although inside he didn't feel like laughing at all. "Why would anyone want to escape paradise?" the American queried. Ponzi looked startled by Odin's suggestion. "Wow," he said slowly, "but what if people get hurt?" "Some deserve to be hurt," Odin replied harshly. "But we'll try to minimize the people damage. We just need to get out of here. This place is one giant cage, and I want to be free. I want to see the real world. We need to know what is really going on out there." The British scientist frowned. He sensed danger. "Stay tuned for the next episode," the Australian joked in a deep voice. "It may get scary." Everyone laughed nervously. "I don't think we can base any conclusions on Odin," the professor cautioned. "The majority of the Tinies are very happy with the freedom they enjoy. Certainly there are some things we schedule for them, like a morning of school and regular meals. They are also encouraged to do some work to earn food and materials. But other than that, they are able to choose whatever interests them." "What do they do in the evenings?" the Australian inquired. "Louis does private counseling work a couple evenings a week, but that only involves 1 or 2 individuals at a time. The rest can hang out at the beach, swim, go-kart on the hill, write songs, draw pictures, feed animals, whatever they like." There were many more questions, and the professor was feeling quite weary. He was glad to see 6 o'clock roll around. Just before leaving, the French psychologist, who had been very quiet all day, made one simple reflection. "It seems to me," she said, "that you have a world of humans who are living lives based on unstable emotional responses rather than grounded principles." "Follow your heart," the professor replied with a look of confusion. "Isn't that the best way to find happiness?" The French psychologist shook her head. "Lives based purely on emotions won't have true, long-lasting satisfaction. True well-being is more than a fleeting emotional state. It's enduring. We shape and are shaped by the world around us. Our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in response to our experiences interact together, influencing our sense of well-being. Unhelpful thoughts lower our moods and lead to unhelpful behaviors. Uncomfortable emotions, like Amy experienced today, while normal, can lead to negative thoughts and unhelpful behaviors like lashing out at friends or avoiding them altogether, damaging our close relationships. In turn, new negative experiences can lead to more difficult emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. It will now be hard for Amy to make amends. Understanding these interactions and learning how to cope with difficult emotions and manage unhelpful thoughts and behaviors can bring a real sense of peace and well-being in all parts of our lives, regardless of circumstances. And that well-being is far better than simple happiness. Bewildered, the professor felt her words ring true, even if he was disappointed that she had chosen to use Amy as her negative example. When all the scientists headed to various hotels in Greenville, he took out his phone. He needed to talk to Evan. Chapter 50. Human Nature. Evan answered the video call in his basement apartment. "How did it go today?" he asked. "Rough," the professor sighed. "I suppose I've been rather idealistic. I thought things would work out differently than they have." "Let me guess," Evan chuckled compassionately. "Odin and Ponzi were complaining. Amy and Zahir were upset about losing their pets." "Even worse," the professor admitted, walking back and forth in the viewing hall as he looked at Evan on his screen. "Georgia and Amy had a big tiff over Zahir. The girls made a rule that the guys didn't know about, yet it impacted everyone. Thankfully, Louis abolished it. Amy told Georgia that she hated her." "What? Amy said that? I can't believe it." "Neither could I, but all the scientists heard. And that's not the end. While everyone was watching, Louis came down hard on the troublemakers, and it sounded like he was running a boot camp. Charlie was crying over Santa. Nancy told Santa off. We had a theft in the store, and this is the worst. Odin learned how to start a fire." "Oh, that is a rough day," Evan acknowledged anxiously. "And very dangerous. How did Odin start a fire?" The professor explained, and Evan agreed, that the solar project had to be abandoned immediately and the reflective materials sent out. "It's tragic that Odin chooses to use the knowledge we give him for harm," Evan mused. "We have to think carefully about what we share with him, or he may seriously hurt others or even destroy the whole place." Then the professor told him about Amy's sad song that he'd heard in the night. "My hypothesis is wrong, Evan," the professor acknowledged. "We created a beautiful paradise with everything the Tinies need for their success. We've tried our best to put systems in place to protect them from harm, but our efforts haven't guaranteed anyone's happiness or safety." "True," Evan concurred, sadly observing the professor's weary-lined face on the screen. After a long conversation with Seth that day, he had so much he wanted to share with the professor, but he wasn't sure his mentor would be receptive. He took a deep breath and decided to try. "I know you really don't like Seth's worldview," he prefaced, "but he's explained human nature to me, and I believe this is the problem." Sitting down on a bench in the hall, the professor groaned. "What do you mean?" Evan explained how the first humans had fallen from the very good state in which they had been created and been cursed with human nature and mortality ever since. It was the same story Seth had explained to his science class at least twice. Resting his chin on his hand while he listened, Jax did not like Evan's remarks that we are no longer naturally good. Our hearts are now inclined to be ungrateful, distrustful, angry, hateful, covetous, selfish, and proud. It takes an influence of goodness to pull us away from these inclinations. "That allures, Evan. What are you saying?" the professor replied with dismay. Swallowing hard and mustering his courage, Evan tried to summarize what Seth had shown him from the Bible. "Sir," he said, speaking earnestly into the phone, "every one of our Tinies has human nature, which in itself is sufficient to bring misery and suffering. And even in the world that we've carefully protected from most tragedies, sadly, the process of death has been accelerated. Death is an enemy that you and I can't destroy. We live in a broken world, Jax, so we shouldn't be surprised to face sadness and difficulties. But there is good news." "I don't want to hear your good news," the professor grumbled, rising up from the bench. "Why would any just God ever think it's fair to put so much suffering on his creation?" Because, Evan pleaded, suffering has a good purpose. Oh, la, how is that even possible? Think about what you are saying, Evan. This is what Seth explained to me, Evan asserted gently. Suffering is the pressure God puts on us to mold us into beautiful pottery. It can strengthen our characters and humble us to develop empathy for others. It opens our eyes to things we may not see otherwise. Most importantly, it can prompt us to search for God's salvation and realize our deepest need. But suffering only has a good effect if we stay pliable in the Father's hands. If we turn hard and bitter, there's nothing God can do to improve us. Our response may break us. Really, Professor said sarcastically, knowing exactly the state that he was in. He didn't like the fact that his one and only assistant was switching sides. Saying a terse goodbye, he slid his phone back into his pocket. That's Seth, he murmured. He's confusing everyone. How will Evan and I continue to manage this project if we no longer see things eye to eye? Evan sighed and stared at the black screen on his phone. How do I explain this to him? He asked himself. I hope he doesn't tell me to stop assisting. I love the Tinies. They need me as much as they need him. What do I do?